The Americans are gone from Afghanistan and now the Taliban are fully in charge. The US exit was complete hours before the Taliban's evacuation deadline. Moments later, fighters of Taliban's supposedly elite Badri 313 unit, equipped with armor looted from the Americans, marched on the tarmac of the Kabul airport and declared victory. They even fired in the air. They were joined by top Taliban leaders. Lots of gunshots fired in celebration. This is the new Talibanistan.
Night vision goggles, boots, body armors, assault rifles, high-tech weapons. From head to toe, these men are attired in made-in-US equipment. But these are not US personnel or Afghan forces. On your screen are the visuals of the Taliban's most advanced force, Badri 313, equipped with looted American equipment. As the US exited Afghanistan, ending its 20-year-long military occupation, the Taliban's Special Forces Badri 313 unit celebrated by parading the tarmac of Kabul airport.
As an Afghan, I'm proud of this moment. We've been waiting this moment throughout 20 years. It's time for us to celebrate our liberty.
Taliban have now access to military equipment worth more than $85 billion. As soon as the last US personnel left Afghanistan soil, top commanders of the Taliban, Zabiullah Mujahid and Anas Haqqani, visited Kabul airport to take stock of what has been left behind by the US military.
د امریکا يرغل ابتداء هم یو ناعقوبت اندیشه اقدامو موږ په لومړي سر کې امریکایانو ته دا خبره کړې وسه دوی باید زموږ په خاور باندې تجاوز و نه کړي کوم ستونزې سه په 2001 کې واقع شوی وي دوی باید موږ سره خبرې کړې وای او جګړې ته اړتیا نه وای پیښه شوی دا سه متاسفانه امریکایانو دغه وخت چارواکو د غرور نه کار واخیست او عقوبت د خپل کار نو سنجولای نن دا نتیجه سه د دوی په ماته تمامېږي او افغان ملت بریا ترلاسه کړه او لوی معرکه وګټله خپل هواد آزاد ک دا نتیجه ترلاسه شو.
Taliban is in full control of Kabul airport, holding guns, sitting casually. The images on your screen show Taliban inside the ATC tower. And as Taliban declared final victory on Tuesday, brutal images surfaced. Scary visuals of a man hanging from a helicopter hovering around Kandahar. Ironically, a Black Hawk chopper left behind by the US Army. Bureau Report, India Today.
Has the 20-year-old war finally ended, or has Afghanistan's latest battle just begun? Chris Donahue, the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, was the last American officer to step off Afghan soil as the C-17 Globemaster left the Kabul airport. With the exit now complete, the United States stands bruised and battered. America's global standing has taken a massive beating, and in cutting their losses, the Americans may have just made Afghanistan one of the most dangerous places on earth.
Ominous gunfire ringing out at the Kabul airport. The Taliban celebrating the last of US troops leaving at the dead of night. Opening fire from automatic weapons after storming the airport. Moments earlier, the last US evacuation flight had taken off, ending the 20-year-old US military presence on Afghan soil. Major General Chris Donahue was the last US soldier to leave Kabul in a C-17 jet. US night vision camera photo from inside the Globemaster capturing the haunting yet iconic moment. Photos of the last batch of US men evacuating showed largely empty barracks at the airport. The US air machines and tanks were found abandoned. many deliberately wrecked by departing US troops in order to stop the Taliban from using them. The pullout ending a hasty and humiliating retreat 1 minute before midnight Kabul time on Monday, a full day before the 31st August troop pullout deadline could end, leaving behind hundreds of US citizens and abandoning thousands of Afghan allies possibly eligible for airlift.
The United States, badly battered and bruised and very clearly now a power in decline. But what does America's departure mean for Afghanistan? Has a 2-decade-old war ended at last, or has a new battle just begun? Joining me for perspective on this very important conversation, I have with me on the broadcast Amar Sinha, Distinguished Fellow at the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, former Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs. He was India's ambassador to Afghanistan between 2013 and 2016. We have with us Ambassador Abdul Basit, former High Commissioner of Pakistan to India. He was in New Delhi from 2014 to 2017, has been ambassador in countries like Germany as well. On this broadcast also is Dr. Avinash Paliwal, Senior Lecturer, Deputy Director in the University of London. He's written a book, My Enemy's Enemy, India in Afghanistan from the Soviet Invasion to the US Withdrawal, looking at India's history in Afghanistan. Sushant Sareen joins us on this broadcast, Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, tracks Afghanistan, Kashmir, terrorism, Islam very closely. Mosca Sangar Niaze is a presenter at Radio Television Afghanistan, journalist now in serious trouble, or at least under serious scrutiny under the Taliban regime. And last but not least, live from New York, we have Jonathan Wachel, Global Affairs Analyst, former advisor at the US Mission to the United Nations. I want to go across to Amar Sinha first for his take on whether this is the definitive end of a war. Will the Taliban be able to govern as a strong, potent administrative force, or do you believe a new period of uncertainty and violence has just begun in Afghanistan? Ambassador Sinha.
Good evening. Well, in theory, this is the first time perhaps the Afghans have an opportunity after the Americans have left to build a future together. You know, the formula that we all talked about, Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, can be put in practice today. Now, how they play their cards, it's still not clear. However, 2-3 days ago, when the Islamic State, ISKP, attacked at Kabul airport, it basically points towards a new chapter opening up. And now, new chapter, as one has seen, if one goes by the history, is basically that it will be used to keep Kabul government unsettled, off balance, weak, dependent on others. So we don't know. The portents are not very good, I must say. But of course, the opportunity for the Afghans and even the Taliban leadership to build an inclusive government, to restore faith in their own policies, because what you see is really a vote. People are voting by their feet when they're leaving for Pakistan. Look at the borders or at the Kabul airport. So it's both a great opportunity, but as I said, unless the Taliban can maintain its cohesion within and shun tribal rivalries and reprisals, I think this war may just add a new chapter to it, and that will be very unfortunate.
Avinash Paliwal, this is the one question that nobody has a clear answer to, but given the wealth of your academic pedigree, what's your best sense on what's most likely? Will this see a new period of an Afghan-owned, Afghan-run government, which is truly inclusive, or are we more likely to see a new chapter in a very old war?
Well, thank you for having me here. And I don't believe there are any end games as far as Afghanistan and its various wars go. And this moment is a strategic shock in many ways for the subcontinent and beyond that. I think for the next at least 2 to 3 years, the Taliban itself will try very hard to offer a sense of political coherence to the world at large. And that would also involve trying to figure some compromise with the Afghan population and be, at least in rhetoric, at least in words, be inclusive. And you can already see those endeavors being taken place by some of the top leaders, whether it's Sheikh Mohammed Stanik Zai, whether it's Mullah Baradar, whether it's Zabiullah Mujahid and even Anas Haqqani. So they're trying to put up a united front given the situation that they have. But given how fractured the situation in Afghanistan historically has been, given how fractured the country has been, both along ethnic lines, along tribal lines, but also along ideological lines within the kind of body politic, the larger rubric of radical Islam that we are talking about, the likelihood of fissures emanating and being exploited by external entities remains very high. So I believe that even if there is some degree of some sort of stability of sorts over the next 2 to 3 years, it's unlikely to maintain unless something drastic is done by the Taliban leadership. History has witnessed that it is not easy to happen.
Ambassador Wasit, what's your sense of whether the Taliban will hold as a cohesive union, or are these intra-faction rivalries likely to emerge and then supersede any attempt by the Taliban to run a united government?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think they have shown during the last 20 years that they can put up a united front. So I do not see that a big problem. Obviously, there are other issues, other challenges which are humongous, which the Taliban would face. I would rather, inclined to say that the jury is still out. We still do not know what kind of a government they would form, how inclusive that government would be. I mean, the challenges are there, and one can also not rule out that there would be many internal, external spoilers as well. So I would overall, I'm hopeful that the Taliban do have the capacity, because that is the only force left in Afghanistan which we can count on. Now it is kind of important for the international community to step forward and encourage them, and so lest they not repeat the mistake of the 90s. So my feeling would be that this overall, I'm still cautiously optimistic, but I think it overall augurs well for Afghanistan if the Taliban can do whatever they are saying. They preserve the benefits progress which has been achieved during the last 20 years. So overall, I am optimistic that the Taliban would be able to intact their unity in order to govern more effectively.
Sushant Sareen, when we hear some of these comments, it almost appears as if we are talking about a reasonable, moderate force. These ultimately are barbarians. They're not misdirected students. And in fact, we saw, and I want to call up those pictures again on the screen, a Black Hawk helicopter in Kandahar with a dead body hanging. Now, we don't know who that dead body is, but what we know is that this is a very powerful message being sent to people in Kandahar, because whatever that person did, there you go, it's on your screen right now. That's Taliban making a public spectacle of this person's death. We also saw at the Kabul airport, after the last American soldier flew away, you had the Taliban indulging in celebratory fireworks, and these weren't explosives like you'd see on Diwali. These were real guns being used, real bullets being set up into the sky. Do you believe cohesion is at all possible, or do you believe that they're just putting up a moderate face and you now watch how the Taliban show their true colors?
So Rahul, number one, I find it ridiculous when people try and normalize the Taliban and say that, look, give them a chance. Just till 2 weeks back, they were carrying out the most outrageous terrorist attacks, including against civilians. They were killing journalists. They were killing ordinary people. They were killing civil society activists, people who were not combatants in war. And suddenly, they are being painted as lily white and knights in shining armor. So I find this quite ridiculous, number one. Number two, I agree that there are multiple fault lines within the Taliban, between the political government and the military commanders, between what they are saying to the world and what they are doing on the ground. There are any number of instances where everything which they've been telling the international community, they've been violating on the ground, and those images are coming out. Then there is this whole thing about will they break their association with terrorist groups? As of now, they very clearly indicated they have no intention of doing that. In fact, the latest information is that they are using some of these quote-unquote foreign terrorist groups to carry out certain operations, including in the Panjshir Valley. So very clearly, if you're not going to be breaking that association, how are those guys? Are they just going to become like something like the Foreign Legion, but only in Afghanistan? Or are these guys going to be used for as leverage against other countries in the region? And then finally, who's going to pay the bills? The Pakistanis, of course, are desperate that this entire venture which they have funded and supported and sponsored for the last 20 years is funded by the international community, which basically means the West. Let the Russians and the Chinese and the Pakistanis spend $7, $8, $10 billion, which is needed to run the state. Why do they want the rest of the world to fund the Taliban state? Because the Taliban state is not going to change. The Taliban have not compromised even a little bit on their ideology, on what their worldview. And finally, Rahul, what do people mean when they say inclusive government? What exactly does this term mean? You know, you keep hearing this bandied about, but does this mean that every ethnic community gets some representation? Does it mean that people who were in the erstwhile government will also get a power sharing in the new dispensation and will be equal partners? There'll be a government of consensus. What does it exactly mean? And what does Afghan-owned, Afghan-led mean? Wasn't the previous thing being also sought to be Afghan-owned, Afghan-led?
Okay.
Was Ashraf Ghani, okay, he was a despicable guy, but was he not an Afghan? Were all the other people who were negotiating not Afghans?
So, Moskan Yazeh,
I think
as someone who is in Afghanistan, what do you think is most likely, not just as a citizen, but also as an analyst? Do you believe that the Taliban will be able to provide cohesive government, or do you apprehend, as Sushant says, that these are barbarians, they've acted like barbarians, and now that the foreign troops are gone, they'll start showing their true colors?
Good evening to everyone. I think they can't run the government by themselves if they are not talking to the other parties, or they make a government that everyone involved on that. Without this, they can't. Or in another side, if they don't get international community support or other countries support, they will can't run this government, because we are watching of this the 2 or 2.5 weeks that they are took over all Afghanistan. They can't do anything by themselves lonely. It will be good that they sit with the other parties of Afghanistan, and they prepare a plan for the government, how to run it, and who will get the power.
Jonathan Wachtel, is this as big an embarrassment as the Vietnam War for the United States? Would you argue that it's actually a much bigger embarrassment for the United States than Vietnam? And is the US now a power in terminal decline, a superpower whose best days are behind it?
You know, Rahul, it's a different scenario from Vietnam, of course. Vietnam was very much a Cold War issue. This is really very much, you know, there are Cold War elements to this, of course, because of Russia and China being involved in the future of Afghanistan. But in terms of a flashpoint, it's really very much an Indian, Pakistan, Central Asian issue, first and foremost, that of course has the ability through terrorism to affect the wider world. But it's a different thing altogether. In terms of abject failure, in terms of the United States and the withdrawal, it's a terrible national embarrassment. It doesn't mean that the United States is, you know, earlier on there was mention that the United States is in decline. There's an argument that, yes, indeed, we've taken some steps backward, but the United States is not a tiny little nation. We certainly have the ability to pull together when the will and way is there to actually get things done. And my sincere hope is that we're able to contain this situation as best we can. From arguably a stance in which our arms are tied behind our back because we're not on the ground anymore. But I really do see this as more of an attempt to try to contain what can be a terrifying menace within the region that will mostly affect people in your part of the world. And that is of great concern, of course. And India, of course, knows very, very well how painful terrorism can be.
Ambassador Amar Sima, do you agree with my contention that the United States now is a power in terminal decline? That if this had happened under Donald Trump, people would have said, okay, that's just the kind of president he is. Now that this has happened under Joe Biden, and given especially his so-called expertise in foreign affairs and matters military, is this then proof that the United States of today is like the Britain between the two world wars? That this is a power that stays up behind it?
Rahul, no, I wouldn't go to that extent. It's true that they have lost interest in this war. Their departure makes it, as your last panelist said, that it makes it a more regional, more local issue. But I wouldn't say that this is their in terminal decline. I think the national power of US emanates from a large number of issues, and it's not just one theater that would define it. But of course, the perception that it is in retreat or it's losing interest, etc., they will have to live down. And the second point that people would have said that this would have happened in Trump administration. In fact, I feel that the entire stage was set in Trump administration. The Doha Agreement, the special envoy, the concessions given to Taliban, the timelines provided to them, it was all set in stone. So I personally feel that President Biden is being, so of course, he managed it badly, but you don't expect the president really to look into which guy goes into which aircraft, which Bagram base should be given up at what time, and what time do you exit from there. Those are issues which were very, very badly managed. Obviously, while they got 3 months
but while
extra,
the president didn't do it, he's got a full apparatus around him, and it's the president who ultimately signs off. There are diplomats, there are military people, there are people who are experts in evacuation. So you can't just say it's not Biden's fault, it's the whole country's apparatus that operates around him, Ambassador.
Oh, absolutely. But what I'm saying that there are other sort of claimants to this credit of this disaster that we are seeing in Afghanistan. And it was not in the making of Mr. Biden alone. So let's not, it was the last two presidents. And this entire process started in 2018. But, well, he was, of course, determined to get out. It could have been done in a much better way, perhaps in terms of the optics. But the fact that he had to leave was very clear for everybody.
Sushant Sareen, was Joe Biden just dealt a bad hand? Or do you believe that the events of the past few weeks are evidence that America now is a power in decline, that countries like India need to be very mindful of what happened in the United States? Because if we are banking on Washington to come to our aid against Beijing, they can just pack off and then they can say, hey, this is a problem for you to deal with.
So, Rahul, there are two things to this. One is, of course, I wouldn't say Joe Biden was dealt a bad hand. I think the Americans mishandled this war right from day one. They were fighting the wrong enemy in the wrong country. But having said that, I think let's look ahead. No doubt the Americans have suffered a lot of reputational damage, and there is absolutely no doubt that very serious questions about their reliability as partners and allies are being raised. But to write off the Americans or American power and say that they're in terminal decline, I think it's very premature. Even after Vietnam, a lot of people had written off the US. But look at the way the Americans regrouped and then combated communism. So to me, what is important is how do the Americans handle the situation which they have left behind? Do they now fall for this, wokist kind of logic and keep funding a horror show like the Taliban and keep funding the Pakistanis and keep giving them concessions and keep getting stabbed in the back? Do they do that? Which means that then I would not want to have any truck with them, because I would think they're in terminal decline. Or do they start combating this menace of terrorism in the way it needed to be combated right after 9/11? And I think what leadership the Americans show on this particular issue will determine, at least in my book, whether the Americans are going to retain their power, their status as a paramount power, or like you say, they will be in terminal decline, and many countries will look for options other than the US to partner.
Avinash Paliwal, does this entire episode show that countries like India need to be very, very watchful in terms of the reliance they place in the US to be able to support them in a future real or covert or overt war with China? Because what the Americans have shown is if it doesn't suit them at that moment, they can pack up, leave their own citizens behind in a country like Afghanistan without caring of how they'll come back. So the amount of reliance we can place in the eventuality of a conflict with China really needs to be assessed very carefully.
Rahul, yes and no. Yes, every leader, whether it's President Biden or previously it was Donald Trump, they will keep the domestic political considerations into play. And you can see the way President Biden has been making statements about Afghanistan. He has not really been talking about the Afghan lives lost. He's been solely focused on the losses of the Americans. So it shows something that this is a power which, at least for now, you certainly cannot write off the Americans, but they're very internally focused despite having a global agenda. And that puts India in a very uncomfortable position. Having said that, I don't think that they are willing to or will likely to give up on strategic alliances like that with India, especially on the question of China, solely because China is a very important domestic issue in the United States as of now. As far as India completely relying on the US, I would say that we should have never done ever. Not now, not before. India's national interests should dictate its alliances. We should never go by the political logics of a different country. I don't know how will the Americans deal with radical Islamist forces, which will get a fillip from now on, while simultaneously challenging the Chinese rise, as we have seen. So we need to see how the Americans deal with these larger dual strategic challenges. We keep focusing on the Chinese, but the fact is that global Islam, radical Islam as a force, has not died down, and it's gonna raise other issues.
And are you concerned, Mr. Abdul Basit, that a lot of this radical Islam may now come back to bite Pakistan? Because earlier the ISI gave shelter to Taliban leaders as America bombed different parts of Afghanistan. Now that some of Pakistan's most wanted men are out of Afghan jails, they're not just going to sit around in Afghanistan in the backlands, in the outlands. They'll probably want to come and attack Pakistan. How big a concern is that for you, and what do you make of Taliban's overtures towards India? Stanik Zai, for example, talking about cultural, political ties, wanting to build relations with India. I'm sure that's not something that Pakistan would have anticipated or liked very much, given the role that Pakistan played in helping create circumstances which are conducive for a Taliban takeover.
No, as regards your latter question, we have no issue. Afghanistan and India are two sovereign states. So far as Afghanistan is not used against Pakistan, we have no issue. I mean, India and Afghanistan can always have a good relationship. That doesn't bother me, at least. As regards your first question, obviously we do have concerns. Though the Taliban have assured us categorically that they would not allow their territory to be used by the likes of the TTP or Balochistan Liberation Army or Balochistan Republican Army. We will see how things really pan out. But at the moment, we are working with them in order to ensure that their territory is not used against Pakistan. There are always, big ifs and buts. But as I said at the very outset, the jury is still out. We would like them to give them time. We would like to encourage them to be on the right track. And this is what Pakistan is currently doing.
Muskan Niazi, how have things changed in the past few days? Now that the Americans are gone, the Britishers are gone, how have things in Kabul really changed? What's it like to be living in Kabul at this time?
Living in Kabul, I think that's like, it looks dangerous. A few minutes ago, I stand on the street that we are talking on in interview, but I didn't feel safe because I saw some Taliban. Then I leave that place and we move from that place. No one in Afghanistan think that about this situation, that 15th of August, that the Taliban will take over all the country. Like this is like shocking things that in 15 of August that we know about the Taliban that took over the Afghanistan, and mostly this situation is not good for women's future. You know, in this situation, women don't have right to join their jobs, don't have right to study, and also every right that they had before of this Emirat regime, now they don't have. Just they let doctors, female doctors, to join their jobs, and also the small child that they can join schools up to 6 class. In this situation, we are very worried about our future. As a journalist, I'm not allowed to join my job. This is not fair, and this is not good for me, because everything is my job that I sacrifices, I struggle for that. But right now, we don't have this right to join our jobs. And like me, that there's 1,000 women that they don't have this right to join their jobs, and they all scared. They all worry about their future, and the future is unknown for us, because we don't know what will happen to us and what will happen to our future.
Moska, you're an incredibly brave woman, because you're in Kabul, unlike some of the guests we've had on the show who were in Oslo or in some part of the United States. You're sitting there and you're speaking so frankly and so fearlessly about the kind of threats that you face. Do you think women such as yourself, who are educated, who in some senses have a global worldview, you've seen the kind of freedoms women enjoy the world over, will they fight back, demand their rights? Are you apprehensive that as the months wear on, this will be a cut back to what happened in the late 90s, where the Taliban will essentially insist that women stay locked up at home? Or do you think Afghanistan has changed too much for people like Moska, Sangar, Niazai to accept a Taliban of the kind that existed earlier?
You know that the 20 years before that Taliban took over in 1996, whole Afghanistan, that was different. I think that was different from today, because the 20 years before, women and people of Afghanistan are not like now. We are changed. Women change, the Afghanistan people change, the Afghanistan governance change. And in this situation, you know, I am in a Kabul, and I am in this midnight, I am in a way to somewhere. But I'm talking to you because I don't want to silence my voice. I want to people know about the situation of Afghanistan, the situation of women, that we don't want to be quiet, we don't want to be silenced, and we want our rights. If this regime, the Emirat regime, gave our rights, we don't have problem with hijab. We are Muslims. We can wear hijab, and we are wearing hijab. We don't have any problem with hijab. We want right to study. We want right to join our jobs, and we want the other rights that we had before the Emirat regime, that we sacrifices about 20 or 18, 19 years for that. We want this. We don't have any problem with Emirat regime. We want to support them if they give our rights. And we will very happy that they will asking for us to join our jobs, to join our studies, to do our normal life that we doing before the Emirat regime.
Amar Sinha, I have goosebumps as I listen to Moska, because she can't go and broadcast on her own network, and here she is on an alien network standing up for what is her right, and it indeed is. Do you think the Taliban will be forced by public pressure to listen to the likes of Moska Niazai, or do you think that just given who they are, given the fact that they are walking around with Kalashnikovs in the streets, firing in the air, celebrating America's departure, that they will want to lock up women, or do you think women will be able to press? How do you think this is more likely to end?
Well, you see, in fact, hats off to her. she is really brave. But I believe that she also gives you hope that this is the type of resistance from the people, from the youth, from the educated classes, which will eventually affect Taliban. It's not the old-time Northern Alliance and people who can take up guns and fight, because I think Afghans generally are tired after 40 years of war. Americans are tired after 20. Afghans have been fighting for 40 years. But having said that, though even Taliban leadership is aware that their foot soldiers are not socialized. When they told women to stay in safe places, they meant stay home. And in fact, I think Zabiullah Mujahid did accept in his second press conference that their soldiers or the foot soldiers don't know how to behave or treat women well. And that was the reason. And I thought that was a very honest acceptance that they have really brought in hordes from straight out of madrasas who have not seen the world. But now you see something that has been gained through brute power, and that is the only instrument that they have. It will be not that easy for them to give it up. So they would, I think, silence a lot of people. We are seeing some signs already, very disturbing signs. But the pressure for any change in moderation will have to come from inside.
Okay. Jonathan Mitchell, how much damage do you think Joe Biden has done to his presidency and to what's left of his term in power? And does this in some senses hurt Kamala Harris as vice president for any attempt that she may make to run for president next time round? Or do you think it's too early and he has enough in his term still left to try and stage some kind of a bounce back?
This has definitely had a humongous impact on, of course, his standing in that of Kamala Harris, no doubt. But as you said, it is relatively early on in his presidency, so there is time to try to at least move past this. You can't just look at this particular situation and I assure you, in a couple of years' time, you can't look back at it and say with complete confidence that it was the right decision. Just too much tragedy has happened. Too much has been opened up. Too many fronts. Too much pain. Even Americans stuck on Afghani soil now, unable to get out. It's a travesty. That said, there are all sorts of other important factors on the agenda here in the United States for sure. And at the end of the day, it's the American people who vote in the president. We have issues with COVID. We have the economy and concerns over that. These are, of course, very much in the eyes of Americans and regular Americans who, of course, are very upset at the images and stories that we're hearing from Afghanistan. And, of course, have, 9/11, that was 20 years ago. That was a huge trauma on this nation. I happen to have been working down there as a journalist when the towers came down and went to Afghanistan. And of course, this particular story is very near to my heart. But in some ways, I'm a bit of an anomaly because I saw it firsthand. So I do see this as something that certainly the Republicans will use very strongly as an argument that would prove out incompetence of the president in terms of leadership.
Okay.
In terms of the, sorry.
Go on, just complete what you're saying.
No, I was just going to comment on the journalism aspect of this thing. I really commend Moscow on her bravery and courage in there. I've seen firsthand Taliban beating women in various parts of Afghanistan when I was working over there. It's an extremely difficult group. And in terms of, whether they're going to reform, the only hope that I can see is actually India and Pakistan, in that you've managed, even though both leaders were assassinated, to have women be premiers, Benazir Bhutto and Indira Gandhi. So there may be the ability, using your examples, to try to instill some sort of respect for women, but the Taliban so far has not shown that.
Maska Sangarniaze, you're an incredibly brave woman, and we've had multiple guests from Afghanistan joining us over the past few days, and I've just been amazed by their candor, their bravery. Every one of our guests, and I'm sure those who are watching, Maska, wish you all the best, not just you, the women and the people of Afghanistan, all the best. And it's fantastic. It warms my heart to see that there is spirit to fight back, to stand up for what you're right. And I hope that the gun is made to bow before your spirit and your fearlessness. And I promise you that every single person watching at this moment, every single Indian and right-thinking global citizen support you, Mosca, and support the other people of Afghanistan in your battle against the gun.
Thank you so much, Rahul. It means a lot.
No, it's true. These words come straight from the heart. And thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your bravery. I think everyone's firmly on your side, and I hope that this ends well for people in Afghanistan, the women of Afghanistan who've seen so much. And why should they go back to their caves or go back to their kitchens? They want to be out in the evening on the streets of Kabul because they are just as independent and as free to do so as anybody else. For the time being, Ambassador Amar Sinha, Abdul Basit, Avinash Paliwal, Jonathan Wachel, Mosca, Sangar Niaze and Sushant Sareen for joining me on the Newstrack. It's been a special episode. We've had an incredibly brave woman come out and say she will not be cowed down. What courage against the likes of the Taliban. Salute, Mosca.